Okay, this is Dr. Mitchell again, and we're going to go through discussing creatine, specifically creatine monohydrate, as an ergogenic aid. And this is one that most of you have probably heard of. It's a very popular one. So we're going to go through some of the basics of creatine, what it is, what it's not. And again, just like we'll talk about with many of these ergogenic aids, all of you already know how this works. As we've talked about previously, creatine, particularly creatine phosphate, plays a key role in anaerobic formation of ATP, particularly during very, very short-term, seconds of exercise. And so it becomes very important in activities where we need ATP very quickly. The reaction to utilize creatine and phosphate to form ATP is a one-step reaction. And so we can all already figure out intuitively that, if you could increase stores of creatine and maybe improve this reaction, you in theory could form more ATP, particularly for that small anaerobic window that this is utilized. And that is true. And so not surprisingly, this is where creatine can be very helpful. So as we talked about, creatine is going to play a big role here in the phosphocreatine system. Creatine, by the way, is found very commonly in foods, particularly animal-based foods. It is one of the reasons, by the way, it's not banned, because the WADA does consider this to be a nutrient so widely available in foods, it would be nearly impossible to ban and unnecessary. And we also store it quite a bit. Now that's the key part of this, is that unlike some of these other ergogenic aids, which have very transient effects like we see with EPO or oxygen breathing or even caffeine, we store creatine, not surprisingly. And so there's very good research that yes, if we supplement with creatine monohydrate, typically somewhere upwards of 10 to 20 grams per day, or about 0.3, 0.4 grams per kilogram body weight per day, that we will increase stores pretty substantially, somewhere in the ballpark of about 20 or 30% or so. There's a limit to that, most research would say. And not surprisingly, at least in theory, that should improve performance. Now, there is a lot of research out there on creatine. I'm not going to go through every study that's been done. We're going to try to go over the bigger picture of it all. And so it's probably fair to say that the majority of research shows that creatine supplementation, when utilized in athletes or individuals who are attempting increased muscle mass, we do see some increases in force, in strength, and as we'll see, these do tend to be far greater in type 2 muscle than we see in type 1. I will tell you these findings are inconsistent. There are studies that have not shown this. There doesn't seem to be a lot of improvements on endurance performance, but again, that makes sense. If creatine is going to play a role in an anaerobic reaction, we shouldn't expect this to improve aerobic endurance, like running a mile or something like that. There is also very good evidence. In fact, one of the things we see in nearly all studies is that any substantial dosing of creatine, we are going to see increases in body mass as much because of water retention as we will increase in muscle mass. And this increase in water retention has been probably the most common side effect. I will tell you, we've seen that in research we've done in our lab a few years ago. We saw that, and it happens very quickly. Within days, we're going to begin to see this increase in mass, which would be near impossible to be solely or even majority from skeletal mass. And so this water retention, which as you can imagine, could be an issue in sports and activities where carrying extra body weight may not be beneficial. And so, not surprisingly, there's value here, but there could be limits to creatine's use. Again, a lot of studies out here, and creatine may be outside of caffeine, one of the most popular studied supplements out there. And not new, by the way. To give you an idea, creatine was first discovered, I believe, in the 1830s. It actually comes from the Greek or the Latin for flesh, because it was so common in fleshy meats like fish and other animal-based foods. So very common supplement to look at. A couple of the little things that we see from the research, and this is just kind of tidbits that seem to show up in a majority of research. One thing we know is that typically, much like glucose, much like protein, ingestion immediately following activity seems to be pretty beneficial. There are definitely individuals, and some studies call them responders and non-responders. There are individuals who, for whatever reason, because they have higher levels of creatine to begin with, don't respond much to increased supplementation. And so some of these literature reviews may read, call these non-responders, and there's evidence that makes up probably about a third of the population. And there definitely also is some evidence that when supplemented with glucose, which by the way is a common thing we'll see in pre-workout and some other formulations, that there even may be greater improvements in creatine storage, and therefore benefits from that creatine utilization to form phosphocreatine and form ATP. And so just some little tidbits there as far as creatine goes. Again, a lot of studies here. Feel free if you want to research any one of these. But that's it for creatine. We'll see you in the next video.